Hello and welcome to the Amateur Austenite. My name is Frances Duncan. I am an author and the founder of the Jane Austen Society of New Zealand. My co-host is my friend Sian.
Good evening.
Today we're discussing chapter 44 of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This chapter is mostly three letters. One from Edmund and two from Lady Bertram. The letter from Edmund says that he's back at Mansfield Park and he's a bit desolate about whether he's going to marry Mary Crawford. He can't imagine marrying anyone else and he's considering sending her a letter to propose. The letters from Lady Bertram are about the fact that Tom, who we haven't heard from in ages, is actually really sick. Edmund goes to find him and look after him, then brings him back to Mansfield, and Lady Bertram is shocked at how sick he actually is. And Fanny wants to go home. No, that's unusual, actually, for Fanny.
She wants to be useful.
Fanny does want to be useful, and although she is superintending Susan's education, she's not as useful as she could be, as she would like to be.
The sort of things she's useful at are not really required at a price house, or wanted, possibly is a better way of describing them.
Edmund's letter is really long and it goes into his feelings, and he seems quite bitter and there's a sadness coming through, almost verging on depression.
He's still with this illusion of this ideal Mary, and he's now seeing her in her natural milieu, which is London with lots of silly friends, sort of Sex and the City of the 1800s, you know.
My first reception was so unlike what I had hoped that I almost resolved on leaving London again directly.
Which is interesting because Mary's letter was quite appreciative of him. She was gratified her friends thought he was hot.
Edmund finds something soothing in the idea that he and Mary have the same friend, i.e. Fanny, and that whatever unhappy differences of opinion may exist between us, we are united in our love of you. It's also so wrong.
Oh dear. I think love is too strong a word, but I do think she appreciates or recognises maybe the goodness in Fanny, but it's just not her.
Can Mary really love someone? This is quite a long passage, but I want to quote it all because it's a little bit vicious, but probably quite honest.
Yes.
This is Edmund. I do not like Mrs. Fraser. She is a cold-hearted, vain woman who is married entirely from convenience, and though evidently unhappy in her marriage, places her disappointment not to faults of judgment or temper or disproportion of age, but to her being, after all, less affluent than many of her acquaintance, especially than her sister, Lady Stornoway, and is the determined supporter of everything mercenary and ambitious, provided it be only mercenary and ambitious enough. Wow! Could never imagine Edmund speaking so freely about somebody like that.
But you can imagine someone complaining that I'd be so much happier if I had more money.
Like my sister. Nothing to do with the fact that her husband's that much older. They don't get on terribly well. Edmund continues that these two sisters have been leading Miss Crawford astray for years. But Fanny thinks, hilariously in her review of the letter, she is quite as likely to have led them astray.
Yes, which I thought was quite
they have all perhaps
quite
been
uncharitable of Fanny.
They have all perhaps been corrupting one another. So we see that Mary is becoming someone else again.
So she's a chameleon based on the company she keeps.
But Edmund says twice in this letter, I cannot give her up. Cannot give her up, Fanny. She is the only woman in the world who I could ever think of as a wife. And then on the next page, I cannot give her up, which is quite painful, especially the only woman I could ever think of as a wife, and Fanny agrees with it. His heart will be wedded to her forever. I could better bear to lose her because not rich enough than because of my profession. that would prove that her affection is not equal to sacrifices, which I am scarcely justified in asking. Again, he would rather think she's a better person, that she's going, look, you can't give me the life that I want to live, therefore I cannot marry you, as opposed to, you're only a clergyman?
Because one has to wonder whether she'll become a little bit more friendly now that Tom's very sick, of course. And he has the option.
Oh, the things that she says then, that's coming up. He considers explaining himself by letter, which means he's considering proposing via letter, which is what happens to Harriet Smith and Emma. Mr. Martin proposes via letter, and he is worried that Mrs. Fraser will be there to give her influence, just like Emma does in yes. Emma. And he's probably quite right about it. He mentions seeing Mr. Crawford and that he is more and more satisfied with all that he sees and hears of him.
So he's still trying to do his best then.
He says earlier in the letter that he's aware that if Mary rejects him, he believes that he will lose a relationship with Mr. Crawford and therefore Fanny, because he still thinks Fanny is going to marry Mr. Crawford.
Because at this point, Mr. Crawford is still behaving well.
I thought about Emma again when I was reading this letter, because Emma's advice to Harriet is that if you're not certain that you want to marry him, you should say no, which was for her own reasons, but could be quite good advice.
Yes.
And Mary is not certain that she wants to marry Edmund. Yes, she probably does want to marry him, but the circumstances of their life she's uncertain about.
Is it fair to essentially string him along when she's convinced that's not the life she wants?
He mentions Maria and says it is mortifying to be with Rushworth as a brother.
That's quite uncharitable but true.
And just a terrible thing to say, really, though. He says there is no appearance of unhappiness in the Rushworth's marriage. But what is he saying?
Mr. Rushworth being an idiot.
He says that she is very much wanted at home because they're still a very small party. Julia is enjoying London, though he hated it. And says, this must not be a yearly visit. I want you at home that I may have your opinion about Thornton Lacey. Which is lovely.
Except he's still planning on marrying Mary.
Yep. Because then there's a stab saying, well, I don't have a wife to consult.
Oh, no.
Fanny is a bit unforgiving about Miss Crawford. She loves nobody but herself and her brother.
Well, at least she acknowledges she loves her brother. Mary loves her brother. Bearing in mind men mature later, you have Edmund, who's just come out of his training, or is still in the middle of it, dazzled by this amazing female, and he would not have had much exposure to many. And so you can understand why he's smitten. And up until now, he's still always thought of Fanny as a sister.
However painful that may be to her.
But she, in some respects, is much more mature than any of them.
As she proves a lot. She does have a bit of a rant here.
Which is wonderful. That's quite human.
But she gets over it as well.
Yeah, no.
She wants him to write to Miss Crawford, though. She says, fix, commit, condemn yourself.
Hurry up and do it. I'm getting sick of all these letters. You moaning to me. Just do it. Take the bull by the horns. She'll either say no or she'll say yes.
She'd never say this to him, though, and I kind of wish she did. But then if it went wrong, she would feel responsible.
And I think in that respect, she's quite right. It has to be up to him.
But she's very clear that their family will never be connected to the Crawford's family unless he is the one that connects them. And then comes a letter from Lady Bertram. We don't get the whole letter. There's a couple of paragraphs explaining what happens in the letter, which makes me think it's very lengthy. And Jane Austen has distilled the information for us because Lady Bertram will dither on. There's quite a joke about her using the news of the Grants going to Bath and to make up an entire letter, whereas Edmund just shoved it in at the end of his.
Yes. You also see a little bit more positive about Lady Bertram through her letters. She does write a good letter, and she writes frequently.
And she does actually do something with her life.
Yes.
She writes letters. She's a very good correspondent.
Yes.
She writes this quite lengthy letter about Tom being sick, but it was sort of playing at being frightened until she actually sees him. Then that letter is in a really different style.
Yes.
In the language of real feeling and alarm.
I suspect the Bertram girls, and I'll include the older generation in that, lack for imagination. If it's not in front of them.
They think that Tom was brought home too quickly because of his impatience to come back to Mansfield. And this is a bit of a poke at him from Jane Austen, to experience those comforts of home and family, which had been little thought of in uninterrupted health. Oh, now you want to come home.
But don't we all?
Yeah.
When we feel sick, where do we want to be?
We want our mother. Fanny begins to live upon letters. Lady Bertram is writing her daily at this point. And without any particular affection for her eldest cousin, Fanny's tenderness of heart made her feel that she could not spare him. There's a brief mention that Mrs. Price doesn't really care. She says what is right every now and then, but Mrs. Price and Lady Bertram haven't seen each other in a long time. They don't appear to form strong attachments, is what Jane Austen is telling us, to try and explain it away. And then the chapter ends on quite a piece of dark humour. 3 or 4 Prices might have been swept away, and Lady Bertram would have thought little about it. Though Mrs. Norris might have said, it's being a very happy thing and a great blessing to their poor dear sister Price to have him so well provided for.
Death.
They're provided for in death.
Oh,
Jane Austen, I love her so much. Once again, we are seeing Fanny not experiencing things herself, but observing them. But this time, she's not there to observe them in person.
Yes.
So she is observing them through letters. Normally, it's everything is happening to or around the main character, although these days, the plot should be moved forward by the main character rather than things happening around them. They should be an active participant that is pushing things forward.
That is how most books are written today. Throughout this novel, Fanny really doesn't do much. In fact, what she does do is actually deliberately not do something, by a deliberate decision not to get engaged. Which, as you said, is we're so used to now more active protagonists who are leading the charge for what's going on. They're either the murderer or the hero. In some respects, she's that channel for us to look at other people, see how people look from the outside.
If we didn't have this internal view of Fanny, we would probably see her very differently, and we might not even notice her, just as she is not noticed by the people around her, because she does keep almost everything inside.
Well, I could imagine her in some other Regency novels where she would be the companion, where you basically just know there's this person around. The indigent relative that's the hanger-on and runs after people's hartshorn and fans and gets the cardigan for them. They're more of a cipher than a caricature, where she's a real person.
And that is our summary of chapter 44 of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. My name is Frances Duncan. You can find me at francesduncanwrites.com and on Twitter at Frances_Duncan. Thank you for listening, and we wish you happy reading.